Oh wow, that was a nice rest. I wonder how long it's been. Well, damn. At least I'm back now. Okay, so it's been a hot minute since the Dungeon Meshi event, I know, but I still wanted to push out this video regardless since, well, if you hadn't noticed, I really like talking about operators that most people don't typically like using, and unfortunately, or fortunately for me, that includes the entirety of the new-ish Dungeon Meshi crew. I'm going to talk about every single one of them here in this video. First individually, then how they are as a team, since they do actually have a team synergy with each other, which is provided by Marcille's talent, and of course comparing how the faction fares compared to the other ones. Well, without further ado, this is the Dungeon Meshi squad. First up, let's talk about the free operator of the event, Senshi. You can think of Senshi as a better gummy. Yup, a better gummy. Senshi is just straight up better in every way. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. His talent actually makes him a tankier guardian than any other guardian of his rarity, increasing his defense and his own healing effectiveness. It is good to note that this is different from Neural's passive, where she increases all healing in the map. Senshi just increases the heals from his own kit, which is the reason why he has higher numbers alongside the increased defense. On to his skills. As you may remember from my other video, he has a different S1 from the usual Guardian Defender. It has almost double the heal amount while also providing buffs. He doesn't save or stack his heals like Neural. He uses it immediately like Gummy, while also providing some mediocre stat buffs. But to compensate for the higher heal amount and buff, his skill cycle is more than double the normal Guardian skill. In my experience, this about balances it out, though of course compared to the other Guardians of his rarity, not being able to save those heals for when it's important, like when your HP is low, is quite detrimental to his use. It's a huge heal. But if he uses it while still near full HP, and he needs it 5 seconds from his cast time, he won't be able to pull it off. Senshi's S2 is quite nice. It really doesn't take a lot for a Guardian skill to be good, and this one does its job quite nice. Nice consistent HPL during skill duration, and a nice burst at the end, while also being manual activation. Senshi is very much a generalist operator like Neural is, and while I definitely prefer operators that specialize like Baseline that specifically counters arts damage, you can't really go wrong with Senshi. And while he is an upgrade to Gummy, I would say that it isn't significant enough to build him if you already have other Guardians built, since of course 4 stars are a much cheaper build. The Dungeon Meshi synergy basically just makes him tankier, as ASPD does literally nothing for him. Though it is worth to note that combined with his talent, he actually makes for an insanely tanky Guardian. He would even have even more defense than a max potential Saria with her defensive module equipped. Senshi is quite literally as tanky as protectors off skill with their 20% defense from their module, but without the condition of needing to block an enemy. Not bad at all. Next up is Laios. He's easily the worst one out of these guys, and honestly is even quite outclassed by the other dreadnoughts of his rarity. Flamebringer's S1 is some nice consistent DPS and sustain, letting him flank low enemy count lanes with medium difficulty enemies. Morgan's S2 is heli droppable and does quite decent damage per hit, making her a 5-star version of Scotty or NTR's S2. Franca has 100% defense ignore. Yeah, sometimes, on a really good skill cycle of 20-second downtime to 30-second uptime. Even compared to those 3 operators that people don't even have the highest opinion of, Laios just comes across as a bit redundant. His S1, in my opinion, is a better version of Flamebringer's S2. Sure, Laios doesn't get the increased ASPD, but he also doesn't need to charge it up with stupid offensive recovery, and he has the ability to ignore a whopping 50% defense from enemies that has died in the 4 tiles around him. So yeah, I think that makes it better than Flamebringer's S2, but who uses Flamebringer's S2 anyway? Okay, so Laios' S2 does have some niche use cases, but they come pretty few and far between. Shaken is a really strong effect, especially since there are very few that are immune to it, but he only applies it to the enemies that he's blocking. He only blocks 1. Well, I already talked about how Laios would be better in literally any other class in my previous video, so I won't talk about it here. There are a few uses for his quick shaken effect. One funny enemy that I can found are the Whirlwind Sheep in So Long Adele. Since they can be shaken, you can use that opportunity to kill them before they get to annihilate your defenses. So yeah, there are a few cases where this skill would actually be good, and I suppose S1 isn't the worst thing in the world, letting him take down even shield guards. But yeah, there's a reason why people constantly call him weak. Laios only really benefits from the Dungeon Meshi synergy from his S1, since the increased ASPD doesn't matter at all during skill 2 activation, and the increased defense only matters from ranged enemies since of course he applies Shaken to those he's blocking. I suppose the synergy pretty nicely improves Laios' role as a lane holder with S1, definitely making it better than Flamebringer's S2 due to the ASPD increase, and of course making him tankier, but it doesn't really save his questionable kit. The last of the 5 stars is Chilchuck, an Agent Vanguard and the undisputed GOAT of the upcoming CC Extinguished Sins for his talent of letting himself and all allies in his range be unaffected by environmental damage. Since the Originium Storm, Originium Polluted Tiles, and most importantly, the Chimera's Aura are all considered environmental damage, he lets others have extremely offensive placements in that stage and Chapter 14 in general. TCB3 coming out making people glaze Chilchuck right after I called him mid in my previous video was something, but I'm sure most people are still aware that he isn't all that amazing since environmental damage is rare. Flaming Reeds, the Toxic Haze, it's useful when it's there, letting people use Chilchuck in really offensive placements in those scenarios, which is great since that's how you would want to use agents anyway, but he is just quite easily outclassed by Cantabile and Surfer. Chilchuck only really clears Puzzle, but that isn't really a very high bar. If you don't have any other agents built though, and you decided to build Chilchuck, you definitely won't be disappointed, as agents are just really strong. I clowned on Puzzle just now, but he isn't even all that bad. What's more is that the Dungeon Meshi synergy is obviously huge for Chilchuck. Who would have guessed that ASPD is amazing for an Agent Vanguard? But to clarify, with this synergy, Chilchuck becomes the best DP printer you have for 5 stars, his S2 even beating out the efficiency of Flag Bearers. Well, as long as you have something to wail on. Now Chilchuck does no damage. His skill doesn't even increase attack, it just lets him ignore physical damage every now and then, which, in fairness, does synergize with the Dungeon Meshi defense buff. But it really seems like you just use him as something of a flag bearer that can still block and attack, since he has defensive capabilities to actually use him as something like that. But nonetheless, Agent's good, and so is he. Lastly, we have the 6th star of the Dungeon Meshi event, and the one you need to actually activate the synergy of this squad in the first place, Marcille. Now, regardless of what the popular opinion about Marcille's viability is, I really think that people overstate how bad she is. She has a unique mana system all to herself, which basically means that instead of charging her SP while she's deployed, she does it while she's still in the operator hotbar. She will not charge this SP while deployed. Now, this is obviously a double-edged sword. You generally don't want to deploy splash casters near the beginning of the stage in the first place, so charging up her SP while gathering your DP is quite useful. This is especially good when equipping S2, as it is a permanent skill, though she still does have a short casting time of 11 seconds of course. You can deactivate the skill and she'll start charging up the better version after another 11 seconds. This skill is really good. Arts damage good enough to hold lanes even against moderately high arts res enemies, but even more so, the CC brought by this skill is probably the most consistent stun application in the game. S3 on the other hand is made to be one huge burst of arts damage. Made to be a heli droppable skill that you have the option of spreading the burst if you don't need all of it at once. On paper, this skill is amazing since it works completely with her mana mechanics, letting her charge while she's still retreated and nuking the enemy once she's up. Honestly, her entire kit reminds me of Typhon's kit, where in S2 is a permanent skill that you have to activate twice, and S3 is a big number skill to nuke a boss. The problem is, Typhon easily pierces through defenses, especially thanks to her talent letting her ignore 50% defense. Marcille doesn't have any way of ignoring arts resistance, so any enemy that has higher than average resistance completely walls her S3. She might even get distracted with these high-res enemies when she's using her S2. If Marcille had even slight arts ignore in her kit, I bet she would have been much better received by the player base, because as it stands now, waiting for an entire deployment time just isn't worth the damage she brings with S3. Not to mention, the Dungeon Meshi synergy doesn't even work at all with S3 equipped. But honestly, at this point, let's move on to the part of the video where I talk about the effectiveness of this squad in the first place. Okay, so as I was saying, Marcille only really benefits from the ASP debuff, and really only S2 benefits, since even S1 is a limited amount of hits depending on the amount of mana Marcille has. But honestly, as a whole, this team's synergy is quite good. They have a lot of ground covered, and they are all pretty good generalists. Senshi is as tanky as Protector defenders, while also having the ability to heal. Chilchuk is a really efficient DP printer while also countering a mechanic that is pretty common in the early game. Marcille is extremely consistent arts DPS while also having really consistent CC and stuns for stun locking. And Laios exists. From the way I'm seeing it, this squad is actually quite amazing for general use. All of them are even quite easy to use. Having them together lets you steamroll through like 90% of content because, let's be so for real, Arknights is an easy game. The Dungeon Meshi synergy has one big weakness though, and that's you need all of them in your squad to be activated. This is of course a huge commitment since you're sacrificing 4 whole squad slots. Sure, you'd be hitting a lot of bases with the squad since it's a really well-balanced team, but this inflexibility isn't present in the other faction bonuses, especially compared to the absolutely busted ones like Abyssal Hunters only needing Gladia, or an upcoming operator actually making ammo-based operators have a crazy synergy. Needing all 4 Dungeon Meshi members means that in most situations, there's going to be some dead weight, since there's bound to be some points where you don't need the role of one of them. Really makes me wish for a part 2 of this collab because there is still some huge potential for other characters, but you know, I don't really think that's very likely. Regardless, the Dungeon Meshi squad really seems like it was tailor-made to be used by newer players. Their skill floor is extremely low, having really simple, straightforward kits, but their power ceiling, unfortunately, is also quite low due to how inflexible their kits are. They really made it so that these operators are what they are, generalists. They really can't be specialized into doing something that they weren't meant to. Well, that's the video. Overall, I really enjoyed the Dungeon Meshi squad. They're not the strongest, but they don't really need to be. Thank you so much for 5,000 subscribers. I'll try to think of something to celebrate. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you again in another 6 months.